to Biblical Insights with Bob. Tonight we're going to be talking about Moses. Moses was a great man, a great leader. He led his people out of bondage in Egypt through the desert and right up to the promised land. If you'd ask any Hebrew today about the great people of the faith, they'd probably say Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, but they would never omit Moses, the great leader. So we're going to look at Moses for a few minutes tonight. And I think we're going to get a glimpse of the man behind the greatness. Remember, Moses was born when they were killing all the baby Hebrews in Egypt, and his mother hid him in a basket in the bulrushes, and the princess of Egypt found him. He was raised in the palace. Then one day he was out and he saw one of his real countrymen being abused by an Egyptian, and he killed the Egyptian. Sometime later he was out and a couple of his countrymen, Hebrews, were fighting, and he tried to calm them down, and they said to him very disrespectfully, "What are you going to do, kill one of us?" Or something to that effect. Pharaoh found out about it and was out to get him, so he fled from Egypt. He went into Midian, and there he found a wife and a father-in-law, Jethro, and he was there for probably 40 years. Then one day he was herding his father-in-law's flocks in the desert, and he saw a burning bush. And what we're looking at tonight is part of the discussion at that burning bush. Remember, the voice came from the bush and told him to take off his feet. He was on holy ground. He came over to the bush. And so I want to read the first 12 verses of chapter 4 of the Exodus, which talks about part of that discussion. And I think as we read that, we kind of get a sense of Moses' own feeling of inadequacy. So let's read it, starting with verse number 1. Then Moses said, "What if they will not believe me or listen to what I say? For they may say, 'The Lord has not appeared to you.' And the Lord said to him, 'What is that in your hand?' And he said, 'A staff.' Then he said, 'Throw it on the ground.' So he threw it on the ground, and it became a serpent, and Moses fled from it. But the Lord said to Moses, 'Stretch out your hand and grasp it by the tail.' So he stretched out his hand and caught it, and it became a staff in his hand. That they may believe that the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has appeared to you." The Lord furthermore said to him, "Now put your hand into your bosom." So he put his hand into his bosom, and when he took it out, behold, his hand was leprous as snow. Then he said, "Put your hand in your bosom again." And he put his hand into his bosom again, and when he took it out of his bosom, behold, it was restored like the rest of his flesh. If they will not believe or heed the witness of the first sign, they may believe the witness of the second sign. But if they will not believe even those two signs or heed what you say, then you shall take some water from the Nile and pour it on the dry ground, and the water which you take from the Nile will become blood on the dry ground. Then Moses said to the Lord, "Please, Lord, I've never been eloquent, neither recently nor in the past, nor since you have spoken to your servant, for I'm slow of speech and slow of tongue." The Lord said to him, "Who's made man's mouth? Who makes him mute or deaf or seeing or blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now then go, and I, even I, will be with your mouth and teach you what you are to say." So here we have the discussion. Moses says, what if? What if they won't listen to? Now, interestingly enough, in the King James Version, it says, they will not listen to me. But in some of the newer translations, like the NASB, which I just read, and the NIV, and a couple other new ones, it says, what if they won't listen to me? We live in an age of what ifs. I like the NASB for that reason. What if they won't listen to me? Now, you see, this gives us a picture of Moses' confidence. Maybe it was because of the way they treated him when he tried to calm his own brethren down. They said, what are you going to do, kill us too? Maybe he felt rejected. Maybe he felt inadequate. But he said, what if they won't listen to me? Kind of implies that he expected to. In fact, the King James Version said, behold, they won't listen to me. Many of the older versions say, they won't listen to me. So he didn't have the confidence. What if they won't listen to me? We hear that question several times. In fact, when I was learning the computer, one of the programs, a spreadsheet, uses a lot of what-if situations. You could follow it on the street and see what if. But we ask a lot of questions out of anxiety that begin with what if. What if she says no? Remember that? Or what if it rains on our picnic? Or what if we can't live on what I'm able to make? Or what if they say no when I invite them to go to church? Or what if it's a bad winter and the fuel bills are too high to pay? Or more recently, in our situation here in Florida, what if the hurricane comes right down our way? So we ask these questions a lot of times. We worry about things. We say, what if? Medically, we say, what if the tests come out positive? But you know, these what ifs can keep us from making progress. Why? Because risk is involved in any progress. Let me ask you, are you living with what ifs or what is? Moses asked the question, what if they won't listen to me? There's a sense of personal inadequacy here. And I mentioned the fact that many translations say they won't listen to me. So I looked up the word that's used for what if. And it can be translated, behold, which some of the older translations, behold, they won't listen to me. Or there is a hypothetical aspect that can be applied to it that comes out, what if? So, what if? So Moses is showing a lack of, God has told him what he wants him to do. And Moses is, I don't think he's arguing with God. I think he's expressing his own sense of inadequacy. Now, I don't know about you, but sometimes I have felt that same sense of inadequacy. And I tend to say, what if? Remember, as we read the rest of the story, the what if really did happen. So God's response to the question to Moses, and I think it's God's response to us so many times. God's response was another question. He said, what is that in your hand? The ordinary answer, the answer to God's question was pretty ordinary, really. It was a staff. Now remember, Moses had been a shepherd for years for his father-in-law. He was carrying a staff. This is something he'd gotten used to. carried it with him all the time. But if you look ahead and you read Exodus and Numbers, how many times do we read where that staff in Moses' hand became a commanding force? He struck the rock and the water ran out. He held it over the Red Sea and it parted. It was an ordinary staff, a shepherd's staff, something that was just part of him. And God said, what is that? A staff, just something I had around, just a staff. And God said, throw it down. But he threw it down, it turned into a serpent. Now, think about this a little bit. God was asking Moses to go back to Egypt and lead his people out. In Egypt, the serpent was almost a national emblem. Some of the women wore a bronze or gold serpent on their head. It was a symbol of Egypt. And as we know, it's also a symbol of evil, symbol of Satan and the devil. So God said, throw it down. It became a serpent. And then God said, and I want you to notice that God said, pick it up by the tail. Now, if you've ever been around snakes, you probably know that you don't pick a snake up by the tail. In the scripture, when we read the scripture, you may have noticed some long dashes, giving kind of a sense of suspense there. But God was showing through this miracle. When Moses picked it up, it became a staff again. I think God was showing that staff, that serpent, that symbol of Egypt, Moses would have control of. He would pick it up and it would become subject to his staff. Also, I think it tells us when we turn our ordinary things over to God, he'll defeat Satan. I got that from reading a commentary by Thomas Constable. He gives several of these miracles. The second miracle, God told Moses to put his hand into his bosom, probably meant inside of his coat. And when he pulled it out, it was full of leprosy. Evidently, God assured Moses that he'd bring him out of there. You see, Israel was in bondage. They were diseased. They were encompassed. They were in trouble. And God was telling Moses that he would bring them out of that disease, out of that imperilment. Finally, God said, if they don't believe these two things, take some water from the Nile. Now remember, the Nile was the sacred river of Egypt. They literally worshiped the Nile. They depended on it for their very life. It was their source of life because it brought water to their crops. Egypt was a very dry country. And so God said, take some water to the Nile and it'll turn into blood with poured on the ground. Remember later, if you read the story, that Moses turned the river into the color of blood. And also later you read that if they drank this, or at least one of the commentaries said, if they drank that water, it was very hard on their digestive system. It caused them a lot of pain. So God was telling Moses that you have the power in the ordinary things to turn everything that Egypt worships and every symbol of Egypt into nothing. So what's the ordinary answer to my what-ifs? Too much month at the end of the money. I've only got a high school education, or I'm just a housewife if you're a woman. I mean, we put ourselves into these ordinary situations. What can I do for God? He asked me to do, but what can I do? I just don't have the ability. What if? But you know what? When God comes into our lives, the ordinary becomes a miracle. What's the worst of the what ifs? The serpent on the ground, and he takes it by the tail. So when God touches the ordinary, your ordinary, my ordinary, it becomes the omnipotent. It's so powerful. Think about it. God uses the ordinary. How many times in Scripture, in life, in history, has God used the ordinary person? Not the great and the mighty, but the ordinary. And done mighty, wonderful things with them. Faith is seeing what is instead of what if. Now, there's another point here that I just thought of when I was studying for this. I want to go back to chapter 3. This is still part of the discussion of God with Moses at the burning bush. God is telling to go his people in Egypt, and Moses says in chapter 3, verses 13 and 14, "Then Moses said to God, Behold, I'm going to the sons of Israel. I say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you. Now they may say to me," here's that, if again, "they may say to me, what's his name? What shall I say to them?" God said to Moses, "I am who I am." And he said, "Thus you shall say to the sons of Israel, I am has sent me to you." That's really, I think, what God was trying to say in chapter 4, what I am. I am is sent. Get the connection? What if I am, he is. What if he is? This is really what God is showing Moses in his answer of changing the staff and changing the hand and leprosy and the water into blood. I am. I am able. The great I am. He is. He is eternally. He's there. It's him that works through us. In the Gospel of John, 7 times Jesus says, I am. He says, I am the bread of life. I will keep you. I will feed you. I am the light of the world. I am the door. I am the good shepherd. I am the resurrection and the life. I am the way and the truth and the life. I am the vine, you're the branches. In other words, God is saying, I am. It's me. And so we need to let God change our what ifs to what is. He is. I am. God is bigger than what's the matter. Remember that. So I ask in closing, what's your what if? What's in your hand? What is? Not your limitation, but what do you have? What will God do with it if you trust and obey? Well, folks, we need to consider this. It's too easy for us to sit back and say, I have nothing to offer. They won't listen to me. I can't do anything. But let God. Trust him. He is always I am that I am. He's able. Trust him. A little poem I wrote down. Doubt sees the obstacles, but faith sees the way. Doubt sees the darkest night, but faith sees the day. Doubt dreads to take a step. Faith soars on high. Doubt questions, who believes? Faith answers, I. Thank you for joining us for this lesson from the life of Moses. I hope it speaks to you. I hope you think about it. I hope you give God what you have, the ordinary. Let him use it.